The howling wind carried Eleanor Harlow's desperate sobs across the empty plains, drowning them beneath the relentless downpour that had soaked through her tattered wedding dress and threatened the tiny bundle clutched protectively against her chest. The baby whimpered, its cries growing weaker as the storm intensified over the desolate Wyoming Territory in the spring of 1875. Hannah Turner had never imagined her life would come to this, abandoned at the altar by a man she trusted, left with nothing but their newborn child and the shame of a broken promise. The rain pelted her face, mixing with tears she could no longer distinguish as she huddled beneath the meager shelter of a lightning-struck oak tree. Her wedding day, meant to legitimize her child and secure their future, had instead become her greatest humiliation. "Hush now, William," she whispered, adjusting the sodden blanket around her 2-month-old son. "We'll find our way." But even as the words left her lips, Hannah knew their situation was dire. The small mining town of Silver Creek lay 5 miles behind her, and she had fled in such haste when Jerome Blackwood had failed to appear, and the whispers began that she had taken nothing but the clothes on her back and her precious child. Ahead stretched miles of open country, with the nearest settlement a day's ride away. Lightning split the darkening sky, illuminating the muddy trail that wound through the foothills. She had to keep moving. Staying meant facing the contemptuous stares of townsfolk who had witnessed her shame. Jerome had convinced her to wait until after the baby was born to marry, promising to return from his business in Denver with enough money to give them a proper start. Like a fool, she had believed him. "I should have known better," she murmured, pulling herself to her feet. Her once white dress, purchased secondhand and altered by candlelight over many nights, now hung in sodden folds around her trembling frame. The rain had loosened her carefully pinned hair, sending dark strands plastered against her pale cheeks. At 22, Hannah felt decades older than the optimistic girl who had arrived out west 2 years earlier, seeking a teaching position and finding instead what she had mistaken for love. She had barely taken 3 steps when William's crying intensified, piercing through the storm with surprising strength for one so small. The sound tore at her heart. Her baby was hungry, cold, and wet, with nothing but her inadequate embrace for comfort. "I know, my love, I know," she soothed, though despair threatened to overcome her. They needed shelter, food, warmth, all things that seemed impossibly distant as the day grew darker and the storm showed no signs of relenting. It was then that she heard the rhythmic splash of hoofbeats approaching through the mud. Hannah froze, instinctively drawing William closer. Travelers on this road could be anyone: prospectors, traders, outlaws. A woman alone with a baby would be vulnerable to any who meant harm. The silhouette that emerged through the rain's swept gloom belonged to a tall figure on horseback. As he drew nearer, details emerged: broad shoulders beneath a rain-slicked duster, the brim of a cowboy hat pulled low. The rider slowed his mount as he spotted her, and Hannah took an involuntary step back, her heart pounding. "Madam," the voice carried clearly despite the storm, deep but surprisingly gentle, "you shouldn't be out here in this weather." The horseman drew closer, and Hannah could make out his features: a strong jawline darkened with several days' growth of beard, eyes narrowed with concern beneath the hat brim. He appeared to be in his early 30s, weathered by sun and wind. "I have nowhere else to go," Hannah replied, her voice barely audible above the rain. The stranger dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots sinking into the mud. He approached slowly, as one might a frightened animal. When lightning flashed again, Hannah saw his expression change as he took in her bedraggled wedding dress, the infant clutched to her chest, and the desperation etched on her face. "Name's Yates Vaughn," he said, stopping a respectful distance away. "I've got a cabin about 3 miles from here." "Not much, but it's dry." He gestured to the angry sky. "This storm's not letting up anytime soon." Hannah hesitated, weighing her limited options. William's cries had subsided to whimpering hiccups, but his tiny body shivered against hers. The man before her was a stranger, yet there was something in his steady gaze that didn't feel threatening. "I'm Hannah Turner," she said finally. "And this is my son, William." Yates nodded, his eyes softening as they fell on the baby. The little one needs to get warm and dry, Miss Turner." "So do you, Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then faltered. "That is, I was supposed to be, today." Understanding dawned in his eyes, but to his credit, no judgment followed. "Well, Mrs. Turner, my offer stands. I promise you'll be safe." Another crack of thunder made her decision. Hannah nodded, and before she could protest, Yates had shrugged off his duster and draped it around her shoulders. It enveloped her completely, still warm from his body. "Can you ride?" he asked, moving toward his horse, a sturdy chestnut mare who stood patiently despite the storm. "Yes," Hannah replied, though it had been years since she'd been on horseback. With surprising gentleness for such large hands, Yates helped her mount, then carefully handed William up to her. The baby, startled by the movement, began to cry again. "He's had a rough day," Yates observed, swinging up behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, creating a secure enclosure that should have made her uncomfortable but instead offered a strange sense of safety. "Let's get you both home." The word home caught in Hannah's throat. She had no home, not anymore. The boarding house room she'd occupied for the past year would already have been reassigned after she'd given notice, confident in Jerome's promises. As the horse began moving through the rain, bearing them toward shelter, Hannah allowed herself to lean slightly into the solid warmth behind her. Yates Vaughn smelled of leather, horses, and pine smoke, honest scents that contrasted sharply with Jerome's fancy cologne. As they rode in silence through the downpour, Hannah wondered what twist of fate had placed this quiet cowboy on the road at exactly the moment when she had nothing and no one left in the world. Little did she know that this rain-soaked encounter would forever alter the course of both their lives. The cabin appeared through the rain like a mirage, a solid structure of rough-hewn logs with a porch that wrapped around two sides and smoke curling from the stone chimney. It wasn't large, but compared to the sodden wilderness they'd traveled through, it looked like paradise to Hannah's exhausted eyes. "It's not much," Yates said as he guided the horse into a small stable attached to the side of the cabin. "But it's mine, free and clear." There was quiet pride in his voice that spoke volumes. In a territory where many men lived hand-to-mouth or chased elusive fortunes, owning land and a home was significant. Once under the stable roof, Yates dismounted first, then reached up to help Hannah down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. Stiff from the ride and weak from the emotional ordeal of the day, Yates steadied her with a hand on her elbow, careful not to disturb William, who had finally fallen into an exhausted sleep despite the journey. "Let me get you inside," he said, his voice low. "I'll see to Briar after." The mare nickered softly as if understanding her care would be delayed. Yates led Hannah across the yard, his hand remaining supportively at her elbow as they climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch. He pushed open the door, and warmth immediately enveloped them. The cabin's interior was simple but tidy, centered around a stone fireplace where flames danced merrily, casting flickering light across the wooden floors and walls. A table with 2 chairs stood near a small kitchen area, while a curtained alcove presumably concealed a bed. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and a bookshelf held an unexpectedly large collection of well-worn volumes. "The fire's still good," Yates observed with satisfaction. "I wasn't planning to be gone long." Hannah stood dripping on the plank floor, suddenly uncertain. The magnitude of her situation crashed over her anew. She was alone with her illegitimate child in a stranger's home, with no prospects and nowhere else to turn. As if sensing her thoughts, Yates moved away, giving her space. "I've got some things that might fit you," he said, crossing to a wooden trunk near the curtained alcove. "They belonged to my sister when she stayed here last year." He extracted a simple cotton dress and a woolen shawl, offering them to Hannah without meeting her eyes. "There's a screen in the corner you can change behind. I'll see to my horse while you get dry." His consideration nearly undid her. Hannah blinked back fresh tears as she accepted the clothes. "Thank you, Mr. Vaughn." "Yates," he corrected gently. "We don't stand on ceremony out here." He glanced at the bundle in her arms. "The little one needs dry things too." Hannah's heart sank. "I have nothing for him. We left with just what we're wearing." Yates considered this problem. "I might have something that could work for now." He dug deeper into the trunk and pulled out a soft flannel shirt. "This could wrap around him until we figure something better." Before Hannah could respond, William stirred and began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching in hunger and discomfort. Yates nodded toward a rocking chair near the fire. "You tend to him first. I'll be back shortly." He grabbed a slicker from a hook by the door and disappeared into the rain, giving Hannah the privacy she desperately needed. Once alone, Hannah sank into the rocking chair, the events of the day finally overwhelming her. Tears streamed down her face as she opened her sodden bodice to feed William, who latched on hungrily. As the rocking motion soothed them both, Hannah took in her surroundings more carefully. The cabin spoke of a man who lived simply but not carelessly. Everything had its place. A rifle hung above the door, but so did a carefully preserved wreath of dried wildflowers. The dishes stacked on the open shelves were plain but unbroken. Most telling were the book's volumes of poetry mingled with practical guides to ranching and territory law. Yates Vaughn was not what she had expected from a solitary cowboy living on the frontier's edge. Then again, Hannah was beginning to realize how little she truly knew about people. Jerome Blackwood, with his fine clothes and silver tongue, had seemed the embodiment of security and respectability. Yet he had abandoned her and their child without a backward glance. William had fallen asleep again by the time Yates returned, shaking water from his hat as he entered. He had removed his duster and boots on the porch, moving in stocking feet across the floor with surprising quietness for such a large man. "How is he?" Yates asked, nodding toward the baby. "Fed and sleeping," Hannah replied. "I should change him and myself now." Yates nodded, turning his attention to the fireplace. "I'll heat some coffee and see what we can put together for supper. You must be hungry." The simple consideration that she might need food nearly undid Hannah again. Jerome had never once concerned himself with her physical comfort or needs. She slipped behind the screen with William and the dry clothes, emerging minutes later feeling markedly better despite her still damp hair and the dress that hung somewhat loosely on her frame. Yates had his back to her, working at the cast-iron stove, but turned when he heard her approach. Something flickered in his eyes as he took in her transformed appearance, but it was quickly masked. "That's better," he said simply. "I've got beans warming and some cornbread from this morning, nothing fancy." "It sounds wonderful," Hannah said sincerely, settling William, now wrapped in the flannel shirt, in a nest of blankets Yates had arranged on a bench near the fire. "Mr. Vaughn Yates, I don't know how to thank you for your kindness." He shook his head, uncomfortable with her gratitude. No decent man would leave a woman and baby out in that storm. He busied himself ladling beans into bowls. "You can stay until the weather clears, and you decide what you want to do next." The reminder of her uncertain future dimmed Hannah's momentary relief. "I was to be married today," she said suddenly, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "William's father promised to return and make things right, but he never came." Yates placed a steaming bowl before her, his expression carefully neutral. "Some men's promises aren't worth the breath used to speak them." "I was a teacher," Hannah continued, needing to establish herself as something more than a ruined woman. "I came west from Boston 2 years ago to take a position at the Silver Creek School. Jerome was passing through on business. He was charming, educated. I believed everything he told me." Yates sat across from her, his own bowl untouched. "What will you do now?" The question hung between them, heavy with implications. Hannah had asked herself the same thing countless times since she'd stood humiliated before the pitying eyes of the town preacher earlier that day. "I don't know," she admitted. "I can't return to Silver Creek. The school board already dismissed me when my condition became apparent." "Jerome was supposed to be my salvation," she laughed bitterly. "How foolish that sounds now." "Not foolish," Yates countered quietly, "trusting there's a difference." He began eating then, and Hannah followed suit, suddenly ravenous. The simple meal was delicious, or perhaps it was just the circumstances that made it taste so good. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the crackling fire and the steady drumming of rain on the roof. As Hannah finished her meal, exhaustion crashed over her in waves. Yates must have noticed, for he rose and gathered their empty bowls. "You should rest," he said. Take the bed behind that curtain. William can sleep beside you. I'll bunk out here by the fire. Hannah wanted to protest she had already imposed enough, but fatigue made it impossible to argue. Just for tonight, she conceded. And tomorrow we'll discuss what I owe you for your hospitality. A shadow passed over Yates's face. You owe me nothing, Mrs. Turner. Now get some rest. Too tired to insist further, Hannah gathered William and retreated behind the curtain. The bed was simple but clean, with a feather mattress and warm quilts that smelled of cedar and sunshine. She laid William down and curled around him protectively, listening to the quiet sounds of Yates moving about the cabin. Questions circled in her mind as sleep began to claim her. Who was this solitary cowboy with his books and his unexpected kindness? What would become of her and William when the storm passed? Where would they go? But beneath these worries lay a thin thread of something she hadn't felt in months: hope. For the first time since Jerome had left, promising to return, Hannah felt safe. And though she knew it was temporary for this one rain-soaked night, that was enough. Dawn broke clear and golden, the storm having spent itself during the night. Hannah woke to unfamiliar surroundings and a moment of panic before remembering the events of the previous day. William stirred beside her, making the small, snuffling sounds that preceded hunger. She fed him quickly, then tidied herself as best she could before drawing back the curtain. The main room was empty, but the fire had been built up and a pot of coffee simmered on the stove. Hannah poured herself a cup, cradling William in one arm as she stepped onto the porch to breathe in the fresh, rain-washed air. The view took her breath away. Yates's cabin stood on a gentle rise overlooking a valley where morning mist rose from the damp earth. Pine-covered mountains formed a jagged silhouette against the brightening sky, and a small creek, swollen with rain, cut a silvery path through meadows dotted with wildflowers. It's something, isn't it? Yates's voice came from her left. He stood at the far end of the porch, a bucket of milk in one hand. Best view in the territory, if you ask me. In daylight, she could see him clearly for the first time. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of the Wyoming sky. His dark hair was overlong, curling slightly at the collar of his flannel shirt, and his face, though weathered, was handsome in a rugged way. Hannah guessed him to be around 35, though life in the West aged a person differently than in the East. It's beautiful, she agreed, suddenly self-conscious of her appearance. Without a brush or mirror, her dark hair hung in tangled waves down her back, and Yates's sister's dress, while clean and dry, fit poorly on her postpartum figure. If Yates noticed her discomfort, he gave no sign. "I've milked the cow," he said, lifting the bucket slightly. "Thought you might want some for breakfast." "You have a cow?" Hannah asked, surprised. Most bachelor homesteaders didn't bother with dairy animals, Yates nodded, and chickens, some horses, a small garden when the season's right. He smiled slightly. "I aim to be self-sufficient out here." Hannah followed him inside, where he set about preparing a breakfast of flapjacks and bacon with practiced efficiency. William had fallen back asleep, and Hannah placed him carefully on the bench before offering to help. "I can't just sit idle while you do everything," she insisted when Yates tried to wave her away. He relented, allowing her to mix the batter while he tended the stove. They worked together comfortably, moving around the small kitchen space as if they'd done so for years rather than hours. "How long have you been out here?" Hannah asked as they sat down to eat. Yates poured maple syrup over his flapjacks with a deliberate hand. 5 years on this piece of land. Before that, I rode with cattle drives, did some scouting for the army, tried my hand at prospecting." He shrugged. "Never found much gold, but I found this valley and decided it was worth more than any claim." "You live here alone?" The question slipped out before Hannah could consider its propriety. "Just me," Yates confirmed, seemingly unbothered. "My sister Martha visits sometimes. She's a widow living in Cheyenne with her 2 boys. They stayed with me last summer while she sorted out her husband's affairs." His eyes drifted to William. "That's why I had some experience with little ones. Her youngest wasn't much bigger than your boy." Relief washed through Hannah at this explanation for his calm competence around William. She had wondered how a solitary cowboy knew to warm milk to the right temperature or fashion a makeshift cradle from a drawer and blankets, as he had done that morning. "What about you?" Yates asked. You said you came from Boston, Hannah nodded, grateful for the chance to speak of her life before Jerome, before her mistakes had defined her. My father was a professor at Harvard. He died when I was 18, leaving my mother and me with little money but a good education. I taught at a girls' school in Boston until Mother passed 2 years ago. Then I saw an advertisement for teachers needed in the Wyoming Territory. Brave decision for a young woman alone, Yates observed. I thought it an adventure, Hannah admitted, and it was for a time. The children at Silver Creek were wonderful, eager to learn despite having so little. I was happy there until Jerome Blackwood, Yates finished for her. Hannah's eyes dropped to her plate. He was passing through on business from Denver, or so he claimed. He was educated, charming, interested in my teaching. He stayed in town for nearly a month, courting me properly, or what I thought was properly. She took a shaky breath. By the time he left, promising to return once his business affairs were settled, I was in love. And as it turned out, with child. Yates listened without interruption, his expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. I wrote to him at the address he'd given me in Denver when I realized my condition, Hannah continued. The letter came back unopened. I tried again, desperate for him to return before I began to show. Eventually, a response came he would be delayed but would certainly arrive in time for a wedding before the baby was born. But he didn't come, Yates said softly. No, William arrived 2 months ago. Still no Jerome. I lost my position at the school, of course, but found work doing laundry and mending to sustain us. Then last week, a letter arrived. Hannah's voice hardened. Jerome apologized for the delays and promised to arrive for our wedding on May 15th yesterday. He asked me to arrange everything, said he would make it all right. And you believed him, Yates said, not accusingly but with understanding. I wanted to, Hannah whispered. For William's sake more than my own, I spent what little money I had on that dress on small preparations. The preacher agreed to perform the ceremony despite his misgivings. She laughed bitterly. I stood there for 2 hours holding William while the entire town whispered behind their hands. When I finally accepted he wasn't coming, I just ran. Silence fell between them. William stirred, and Hannah reached automatically to check on him, finding comfort in his peaceful face. What will you do now? Yates asked finally, echoing his question from the night before. Hannah had been considering this very question since dawn. I have an aunt in California who might take us in, though the journey would be difficult. Or I could try for another teaching position in a town where no one knows my history, though that would mean lying about William. Yates nodded thoughtfully, then rose to clear their plates. His back to her, he spoke carefully. There's a third option if you'd consider it. Hannah waited, unsure what he might suggest. You could stay here, Yates said, turning to face her. Not forever if that's not what you want, but until you're on your feet again, until you decide. Hannah stared at him, startled by the offer. Stay here, but I would be imposing on your hospitality, your privacy. It's a big valley, Mrs. Turner, room enough for privacy when needed. His eyes were steady on hers. Winter's passed and spring planting is just beginning. I could use an extra pair of hands and you need a safe place for you and your boy. Seems like a fair arrangement to me. People would talk, Hannah said automatically, then nearly laughed at herself. What reputation did she have left to protect? Yates seemed to read her thoughts. Nearest neighbor is 5 miles away and they mind their business. Town's a half-day's ride, nobody to talk but the chickens and that opinionated cow. Despite everything, Hannah found herself smiling. And what would I do to earn my keep? Can you cook? Yates asked. Yes, quite well. Garden? I had a small herb garden in Silver Creek and I helped with the school's vegetable plot. Yates nodded. Then we'd manage fine. The cabin needs a woman's touch, truth be told. And he hesitated, a fleeting vulnerability crossing his face. It gets quiet out here, too quiet sometimes. Hannah understood then that he was offering a fair exchange, her domestic skills and company for his protection and provision. It wasn't charity, which would have been harder to accept. Just until I decide what's best for William and me, she said slowly. And I would insist on a proper arrangement, perhaps a written agreement about expectations. Something like admiration flickered in Yates's eyes. You're a careful woman, Mrs. Turner. I respect that. He extended his hand across the table. We have an agreement. Hannah placed her hand in his much larger one. noting the calluses that spoke of honest work and the gentleness with which he clasped her fingers. "We have an agreement, Mr. Vaughn." Neither could have known in that moment how much more than a practical arrangement they had just begun. The days settled into a rhythm that surprised Hannah with its ease. Mornings began early, with Yates tending to the livestock while Hannah prepared breakfast and cared for William. They would eat together, discussing the day's tasks, before Yates headed out to his fields or to check the small herd of cattle he kept in the high meadow. Hannah took charge of the cabin, cleaning and organizing with a teacher's precision. She discovered that while Yates kept things tidy, there were many small improvements to be made: curtains sewn from fabric he had on hand, shelves rearranged for better efficiency, floors scrubbed to a golden glow. In the afternoons, she worked in the vegetable garden, William sleeping nearby in a wooden cradle Yates had fashioned during the first week of their stay. The baby thrived in the mountain air, growing plumper and more alert with each passing day. He began to smile, a gummy, toothless grin that melted Hannah's heart and, she noticed, seemed to have a similar effect on Yates. For his part, Yates proved to be a considerate companion. He gave Hannah space when she needed it, but was always nearby if a task required strength beyond her capabilities. He never entered the curtained sleeping area that was now hers and William's domain, and he made no comments about her past or her situation. Instead, he treated her with a quiet respect that gradually restored her sense of dignity. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit by the fire. Sometimes they talked. Yates told stories of his travels across the West, and Hannah shared memories of Boston and her teaching days. Other times they read, Yates from his collection of poetry and Hannah from the well-worn copy of Little Women she had discovered on his bookshelf. "It was Martha's," Yates explained when he caught her surprised expression, "but I've read it too. Good story. You continue to surprise me, Mr. Vaughn," Hannah had replied. "Not many cowboys I know would admit to reading Louisa May Alcott. Not many cowboys you know have a Harvard-educated schoolteacher sizing up their bookshelves," he had countered with a rare smile that transformed his face. As May turned to June, Hannah found herself watching Yates when he wasn't aware: the careful way he handled tools, the gentleness with which he approached the animals, the thoughtful expression that crossed his face when he gazed out over his land at sunset. He was a man of few words but deep thoughts, she realized, and far more educated than his occupation might suggest. One evening, as they sat on the porch after supper, William asleep in Hannah's arms, she finally asked the question that had been forming in her mind. "How did a man like you end up alone out here, Yates?" He was silent for so long that Hannah thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost distant. "I wasn't always alone. I was married once back in Colorado." He stared out at the darkening valley. "Her name was Elizabeth. We were young, too young, probably. I was working a silver mine then, thought I'd make us rich." He shook his head. "The winter of '67 was brutal. Elizabeth took sick with fever. Doctor couldn't get through the snow in time." Hannah's heart constricted. "I'm so sorry." Yates nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. "After that, I couldn't stay put. Spent years drifting, taking whatever work came along. Wasn't until I found this valley that I felt like stopping again." He glanced at her. "What about you? Before Jerome, was there someone else?" Hannah shifted William to her other arm. "There was a young man in Boston, a fellow teacher. We were informally engaged before my mother died, but when I decided to come west, he wouldn't consider it. Said no respectable woman would venture into such uncivilized territory." "His loss," Yates said simply. The statement hung in the air between them, weighted with something neither was ready to acknowledge. Hannah felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the mild June evening. "We should get the little one to bed," Yates said finally, rising from his chair. "Early start tomorrow. I'm riding to town for supplies." Hannah nodded, standing as well. "I've made a list of things we need. I insist on paying my share when my first month's arrangement is complete." Yates didn't argue, though Hannah knew he had no intention of accepting her money. In the 3 weeks since she had arrived, he had quietly provided everything she and William needed without ever making her feel indebted. As they moved inside, their hands brushed accidentally. Hannah felt a jolt of awareness race through her, followed immediately by guilt. It was too soon after Jerome's betrayal to be noticing another man's touch, too soon to be feeling the stirrings of attraction. Besides, their arrangement was practical, not romantic. Yet as she settled William in his cradle and prepared for bed, Hannah couldn't help wondering if Yates had felt that same spark. And if he had, what it might mean for both of them. The trip to town marked a turning point in their tentative relationship. Yates returned late in the afternoon, his wagon loaded with supplies including several packages specifically for Hannah and William that hadn't been on her list. Fabric for new dresses, proper diapers for the baby, a hairbrush and mirror, small luxuries she hadn't requested but clearly needed. "You shouldn't have," she protested as he unloaded the items. "Saw Mrs. Mitchell at the general store," Yates replied, referencing the wife of Silver Creek's only doctor. "Told her I had a widowed cousin staying with me and her baby needed things. She helped me choose." He shrugged as if embarrassed by his thoughtfulness. Didn't seem right for William to keep wearing makeshift clothes when proper ones were available. Hannah noted his careful construction of her identity, a widowed cousin rather than an unwed mother. It was a kindness she hadn't expected, this protection of her reputation. "Thank you," she said simply, knowing he would brush off more effusive gratitude. That evening, as she cut into the new fabric, planning dresses that would fit her properly, Yates cleared his throat from his place by the fire. "There's something else," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Got a letter in town from my sister Martha." Hannah looked up, curious. "Is everything all right?" "She's fine. But she's planning to visit next month, bringing the boys." He handed her the letter. "Thought you should know since it affects our arrangement." Hannah scanned the cheerful correspondence, which mentioned a 2-week stay in late July. "I see," she said carefully. "I should make other arrangements before then." "That's not what I meant," Yates said quickly. "You're welcome to stay. Martha's good people, she won't judge your situation, but she'll wonder about our living arrangement," Hannah finished for him. The unspoken complication hung between them. A man and an unrelated woman living under the same roof, regardless of separate sleeping areas, would raise eyebrows even in the relatively permissive atmosphere of the frontier. Yates nodded, his expression troubled. "I told folks in town you were my widowed cousin, but Martha knows all my kin. She'll see through that right quick." Hannah set aside her sewing, mind racing. "I could say I'm a housekeeper you've hired. With a baby," Yates raised an eyebrow. "Besides, Martha would wonder why I hadn't mentioned hiring help in my letters." They sat in silence, the problem seemingly insurmountable. Finally, Yates spoke again, his voice carefully neutral. "There's another solution, though I hesitate to suggest it." Hannah waited, sensing his discomfort. "We could marry," he said, the words landing between them like stones in still water. "A marriage of convenience, to be clear. It would explain your presence here, provide William with a name, and satisfy propriety." Hannah stared at him, speechless. Of all the solutions, this was the last she had expected him to propose. "I know it's sudden," Yates continued, his eyes fixed on the fire rather than on her. "And given your recent experience, probably unwelcome, but it would be a practical arrangement, nothing more. You'd have the protection of my name and home for as long as you need it." "And what would you gain from this arrangement?" Hannah asked, finding her voice at last. Yates's gaze finally met hers. "A partner. Someone to share the work and the quiet evenings. I've been alone a long time, Hannah." "It's no kind of life." The honesty of his answer struck her deeply. This wasn't a proposal born of passion or even particular affection, it was born of mutual need and respect. Perhaps that made it more valuable than Jerome's pretty words and empty promises. "If we did this," Hannah said slowly, "there would need to be clear understandings between us." "Of course," Yates agreed. "You'd be mistress of the house in truth, not just in practice. William would bear my name, have rights to this property same as any son. Beyond that," he hesitated. "I would expect nothing from you that you weren't willing to give." The delicate reference to marital relations hung in the air. Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks but appreciated his directness. This was, after all, a business arrangement they were discussing, and all terms should be clear. "I need time to consider," she said finally. "This isn't a decision to make hastily." Yates nodded, visibly relieved that she hadn't rejected the idea outright. Take all the time you need. Martha won't be here for 6 weeks. That night, alone behind her curtain with William sleeping peacefully beside her, Hannah considered Yates's unexpected proposal. Marriage to him would solve many practical problems. It would give William legitimacy, provide them both with security, and eliminate the awkwardness of their current situation. But it would also bind her to a man she barely knew, in a commitment far more permanent than their temporary arrangement. Could she trust again after Jerome's betrayal? Could she enter a marriage without love, even if respect and friendship were present? As she drifted toward sleep, Hannah realized that the idea didn't repel her as it might have even a month ago. There was something solid and trustworthy about Yates Vaughn that Jerome Blackwood had never possessed, for all his charm and education. Perhaps a marriage built on honest need and mutual respect had a better foundation than one built on passionate promises and pretty words. The thought followed her into dreams where Yates's steady blue eyes watched over her and William with unwavering constancy. A week passed, then 2, with the question of marriage hovering unspoken between them. Hannah threw herself into caring for the cabin and garden, while Yates spent long days in the fields, returning each evening more tired than usual. They maintained their routine of shared meals and quiet evenings, but a new awareness colored their interactions, a careful politeness, a deliberate distance. The situation came to a head one afternoon in early July. Hannah was hanging laundry in the yard, William napping in his cradle nearby, when the sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Visitors were rare enough to cause concern, especially with Yates away working the north pasture. She shaded her eyes against the summer sun, relaxing slightly when she recognized the rider as Dan Mitchell, the doctor from Silver Creek, whose wife had helped Yates select baby items. Still, her heart pounded as he approached. Had someone from town connected her to the widowed cousin Yates had mentioned? "Afternoon, madam," Dr. Mitchell called, dismounting with the ease of a man accustomed to making house calls on horseback. He was in his 50s, his beard streaked with gray, his kind eyes set in a face weathered by years of frontier medicine. "Dr. Mitchell," Hannah acknowledged, mentally rehearsing the cousin's story Yates had established. "What brings you out this way?" "Yates," the doctor replied, concern evident in his voice. "Found him about 2 miles back, took a fall from that temperamental stallion he's been training. Stubborn fool refused to let me bring him in my wagon, insisted on riding home himself, though he's got a badly sprained ankle and maybe a cracked rib. He should be along shortly." Alarm coursed through Hannah. "Is he seriously hurt?" "Nothing life-threatening, but he'll need rest, which I suspect he won't take willingly." Dr. Mitchell smiled ruefully. "Thought I'd better warn you and give you these." He handed her a small packet of powders. "For the pain, mix with water." Hannah thanked him, still processing the news. The doctor studied her with professional interest. "You must be the cousin Yates mentioned. Strange he never spoke of you before, though I've known him 5 years. "We weren't close until recently," Hannah replied carefully. "My husband died last winter and Yates kindly offered us a home, doctor." Mitchell's gaze drifted to William, still sleeping peacefully. "Fine-looking boy. How old?" 3 months, Hannah answered truthfully. The doctor nodded, though something in his expression suggested he was making calculations that didn't quite add up. Before he could comment further, the sound of another horse approaching drew their attention. Yates appeared, riding slowly, his face pale beneath his tan. He dismounted with obvious difficulty, wincing as his weight settled on his right leg. "Told you I'd make it fine," he said to the doctor, though his strained voice belied the words. "And I told you you're a stubborn fool," Dr. Mitchell replied good-naturedly. "Let's get you inside so I can wrap that ankle properly." Hannah hurried forward, instinctively slipping her arm around Yates's waist to support him. He stiffened briefly, then relaxed against her, allowing her to help him to the porch and into the cabin. The casual intimacy of the gesture wasn't lost on Dr. Mitchell, whose eyebrows rose slightly. Once inside, Hannah helped Yates to his chair while the doctor examined his injuries more thoroughly. The diagnosis was as expected: a severe sprain and bruised ribs, painful but not dangerous if properly rested. Which means staying off that foot for at least a week, doctor. Mitchell emphasized, wrapping Yates's ankle tightly. No arguments, Yates grimaced. Can't afford a week of idleness. Hay needs cutting, cattle need moving to fresh pasture. I can help, Hannah interjected. I'm stronger than I look. Both men turned to her with identical expressions of doubt, which she might have found amusing under different circumstances. You've got the baby to care for, Yates reminded her, and a household to run, added Dr. Mitchell. No, what Yates needs is hired help for a few weeks. There's no one available this time of year, Yates argued. Everyone's busy with their own land. The doctor sighed, packing his medical bag. Well, you'll have to figure something out unless, he hesitated, glancing between them. I don't mean to pry, but are you two actually cousins? Because if not, we're engaged, Hannah said suddenly, the words surprising her as much as the men. We were planning to marry before Martha's visit next month, but we've been waiting for the proper papers from back east. Yates's eyes widened fractionally, but to his credit, he didn't contradict her. Dr. Mitchell looked between them, then nodded slowly. I see. Well, that explains a few things. He closed his bag with a snap. In that case, I'd suggest moving up your timetable. As a married couple, you could hire one of the younger Mitchell boys to help for a few weeks without raising eyebrows. And it would make things simpler before your sister arrives, Yates. After the doctor departed, promising to return in a few days to check on Yates's progress, silence filled the cabin. William had awakened and now gurgled happily in the wooden cradle Yates had made, oblivious to the adult's tension. I'm sorry, Hannah said finally. I shouldn't have spoken for both of us. It just seemed the simplest explanation. Yates shifted in his chair, wincing slightly. No need to apologize. You're right, it is the simplest explanation. He met her eyes directly. Is it also your answer to my proposal? Hannah took a deep breath. Yes, she said quietly, if the offer still stands. It does. Yates's voice was steady, though Hannah thought she detected a hint of something more than practical consideration in his eyes. Are you certain? I don't want you feeling forced by circumstances. Hannah considered his question carefully. Was she certain? No. But she was certain that returning to a world that would judge her and William harshly was less appealing than building a life here with this quiet, honorable man who had offered them safety and respect. I'm certain enough, she said finally. We can make this work, Yates, for William's sake and for practical reasons. For practical reasons, Yates echoed, though something in his tone suggested he might hope for more eventually. Well then, Mrs. Turner, it appears we have a wedding to arrange. They were married 3 days later by a traveling preacher who stopped at the Mitchell farm and was persuaded to ride out to Yates's property. The ceremony was brief and simple, conducted in the cabin's main room with Dr. and Mrs. Mitchell as witnesses. Hannah wore a new dress she had hastily sewn from the fabric Yates had brought from town, a soft blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. Yates, still unable to put much weight on his injured ankle, stood with the aid of a cane Dr. Mitchell had provided. Despite his discomfort, he had shaved carefully and wore a clean white shirt that Hannah had pressed for the occasion. When he spoke his vows, his deep voice never wavered. I, Yates Daniel Vaughn, take you, Hannah Marie Turner, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Hannah repeated her own vows clearly, holding William in one arm while placing her other hand in Yates's large, calloused one. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Yates hesitated only briefly, before leaning down to place a chaste kiss on her lips, their first physical contact beyond the accidental brushing of hands or the supportive arm when he was injured. The brief touch sent an unexpected warmth through Hannah, a sensation she quickly attributed to the emotional nature of the day rather than any particular attraction to her new husband. After a simple meal prepared by Hannah and supplemented by Mrs. Mitchell's contribution of a wedding cake, the witnesses departed, leaving the newly formed family alone. An awkward silence fell as the reality of their situation settled around them. Well, Mrs. Vaughn, Yates said finally, testing the new name. "I believe this calls for a toast." He produced a bottle of whiskey from a cabinet and poured 2 small glasses. "To new beginnings." Hannah accepted the glass, though she rarely drank spirits. "To new beginnings," she echoed, taking a small sip that burned pleasantly down her throat. The question of sleeping arrangements hung unspoken between them. During his convalescence, Yates had been sleeping on a makeshift bed near the fire, unable to climb to the loft where he usually slept when Hannah occupied the curtained alcove. Now, as husband and wife, different expectations might naturally arise. As if reading her thoughts, Yates cleared his throat. "I meant what I said before, Hannah. Nothing changes in our arrangements unless you want it to. I'll continue sleeping by the fire until I can manage the loft stairs again." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment mingled in Hannah's response. "Thank you, I think that would be best for now." Yates nodded, his expression unreadable. "For now," he agreed. That night, lying in what was now legitimately her marriage bed, Hannah listened to Yates's deep, even breathing from the other side of the curtain. Her husband, the word, felt strange even in the privacy of her thoughts. A man she had known barely 2 months, yet one who had shown her more consideration and respect than Jerome had in a year of courtship. William stirred beside her, and Hannah drew him close, breathing in his sweet baby scent. Thanks to Yates, her son would now grow up with a name untainted by scandal, with land and a home that was his by right. It was more than she had dared hope for when she had fled Silver Creek in the pouring rain. If the arrangement lacked the romantic love she had once dreamed of, it offered something perhaps more valuable: security, respect, and the possibility of building a genuine partnership based on mutual need and growing affection. As she drifted toward sleep, Hannah realized that for the first time since discovering Jerome's betrayal, she was looking toward the future with hope rather than dread. July unfurled in a haze of heat and activity. With Yates temporarily limited by his injury, Hannah found herself taking on tasks she had never imagined, attempting learning to harness the plow horse under Yates's patient instruction, helping young Tommy Mitchell, hired as promised after the wedding, move the cattle to fresh pasture, even assisting with the early hay cutting when Yates was finally able to return to limited work. The physical labor was exhausting, but satisfying in a way her previous life had never been. Each evening, Hannah collapsed into bed with aching muscles and sun-reddened skin, but also with a deep sense of accomplishment. She was contributing meaningfully to their shared life, proving her worth beyond the domestic duties she had initially agreed to perform. Yates, for his part, showed both gratitude for her efforts and respect for her determination. He never suggested that certain tasks were beyond her capabilities because she was a woman, instead offering practical advice and steady encouragement. When she returned to the cabin covered in dirt and sweat, he would have coffee brewing and sometimes a basin of warm water ready for her to wash away the day's grime. It was a strange courtship, if it could be called that, a marriage already legally consummated, but emotionally still in its tentative early stages. They circled each other carefully, learning each other's habits and preferences, building a foundation of mutual respect that might, in time, grow into something more. The changes were subtle at first, Hannah taking more care with her appearance even on ordinary days, pinning her hair in a becoming style rather than the practical bun she had adopted for farm work. Yates finding reasons to touch her hand when passing the coffee pot, to stand closer than strictly necessary when showing her how to repair a fence post. Small gestures that acknowledged the growing awareness between them without pushing boundaries either wasn't ready to cross. William became the bridge that most naturally connected them. The baby thrived under their combined care, growing plump and increasingly alert. His first true laugh, a bubbling, joyous sound, came one evening as Yates dangled a wooden toy horse he had carved above the cradle. The sound startled them both, then drew them together in shared delight. "He has your smile," Yates observed, his own face softened by a rare, full grin. "And your serious expression when he's thinking," Hannah replied without considering how the comparison might be received. But rather than awkwardness, The moment brought a warm silence as they both contemplated the idea of William bearing traits from both of them of truly becoming their child, rather than simply Hannah's offspring, and Yates's legal responsibility. The letter announcing Martha's imminent arrival came in mid-July, giving them a week to prepare for Yates's sister and nephews. Hannah threw herself into readying the cabin, sewing fresh curtains, baking bread and pies to freeze, ensuring every surface gleamed. If she was anxious about meeting her new sister-in-law and having their unusual arrangement scrutinized, she channeled it into productive energy. Yates, too, seemed unusually tense as the visit approached. "Martha can be direct," he warned Hannah as they sat on the porch one evening, watching fireflies rise from the meadow grass. "She doesn't mean to give offense, but she speaks her mind." "I look forward to meeting her," Hannah said with more confidence than she felt. "From your stories, she sounds like a remarkable woman." Yates nodded, his profile strong in the fading light. "She is. Held that family together after James died, ran his business until she could sell it on good terms." He hesitated. "She'll have questions about us, how we met, our courtship." "We should have our story straight." They had maintained the fiction that Hannah was a widowed cousin with the Mitchells and the few other neighbors they had encountered since the wedding, but Martha would require a more detailed explanation. "We'll tell her as much of the truth as we can," Hannah decided. "That we met when you found me stranded in the rain with William, that you offered shelter, then employment, and that we developed a mutual respect that led to marriage." "And Jerome?" Yates asked quietly. Hannah stiffened. "They rarely spoke of William's biological father. What about him?" "Martha will want to know about William's father, your first husband." Hannah considered this. "We'll say he was a businessman who died before William was born. It's close enough to the truth." She paused. "Does it bother you?" "That William isn't your blood." Yates turned to face her fully, his expression serious in the gathering dusk. "No," he said firmly. "He became mine the moment I signed that marriage certificate, before that even." He looked out toward the mountains, then back to Hannah. "I never thought I'd have a family again after Elizabeth. Never thought I deserved one, but you and William, you've brought life back to this place, back to me." The raw honesty in his voice caught Hannah unprepared. This was more than either had acknowledged before, more than the practical arrangement they had agreed to. Before she could formulate a response, Yates stood, his recovered ankle now strong enough to bear his weight without the cane. "It's getting late," he said, his voice returning to its usual measured tone. "And we have an early start tomorrow if we're to get the south field finished before Martha arrives." Hannah nodded, rising as well. As they moved toward the cabin door, their hands brushed accidentally at first, then with deliberate intent as Yates's fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. They stood for a moment in the doorway, connected by that simple touch, before Yates reluctantly released her hand and they moved inside to their separate sleeping areas. That night, Hannah lay awake long after William had settled, contemplating the growing complexity of her feelings for Yates. What had begun as gratitude had developed into respect, then genuine friendship. But lately, she had found herself watching him as he worked, admiring not just his strength and competence but the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, the rare smile that transformed his serious face, the gentleness of his large hands when he held William. Was it possible she was falling in love with her husband? The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She had been so devastated by Jerome's betrayal that she had sworn never to trust her heart to another man. Yet Yates was nothing like Jerome. Where Jerome had been all charm and empty promises, Yates was substance and fulfilled commitments. Where Jerome had abandoned her when she needed him most, Yates had claimed her and William as his own, offering them not just his name but a true home. As sleep finally claimed her, Hannah acknowledged the truth she had been avoiding. She wanted more from this marriage than practical partnership. She wanted the love and connection she had once dreamed of, not with Jerome Blackwood, but with the quiet, honorable man sleeping just beyond the curtain. Martha Vaughn Campbell arrived with the energy of a summer thunderstorm, sweeping into the cabin with her two sons Robert, 10, and James, 7, in her wake. She was younger than Hannah had expected, perhaps 30, with Yates's blue eyes and a decisive manner that commanded attention without seeking it. "So you're the woman who finally tamed my wild brother," she declared, embracing Hannah warmly after the introductions. "I was beginning to think he'd live out his days with only that cantankerous cow for company." "Martha," Yates warned, though his tone held affection rather than true reproach. "Oh, hush," his sister replied, turning her attention to William, who watched the newcomers with wide eyes from Hannah's arms. "And this handsome fellow must be my new nephew, may I?" She held out her arms, and Hannah transferred William to her, watching as Martha expertly settled him against her shoulder. "He's beautiful, Hannah. Those eyes, they'll break hearts someday." The boys, initially shy, soon warmed to their new aunt and cousin, especially when Yates produced the wooden toys he had been carving in anticipation of their visit. By supper time, the cabin hummed with a family energy it had never known before, voices overlapping as Martha shared news from Cheyenne, and the boys recounted their journey with childish enthusiasm. That night, with Martha and the boys settled in the curtained alcove, Hannah and Yates climbed to the loft together for the first time. Although they had agreed this was a necessary arrangement for appearance's sake, the reality of sharing the small space brought attention neither had fully anticipated. The loft was simply furnished with Yates's narrow bed, a trunk for his clothes, and a small table bearing a lamp and a few books. Yates had cleared space for Hannah's few possessions and added a cradle for William, who would sleep between them. "I'll put some blankets on the floor," Yates offered, already reaching for extra bedding. "Don't be ridiculous," Hannah replied, summoning her courage. "The bed is big enough for both of us with William between us. No need for you to sleep on hard boards when we're both adults." Yates hesitated, then nodded. They prepared for bed with careful movements, each acutely aware of the other's presence in the confined space. When they finally lay side by side, William sleeping peacefully between them, Hannah found herself holding her breath, conscious of every inch where her body almost touched Yates's. "Good night, Hannah," Yates said softly, his voice low in the darkness. "Good night," she whispered back, certain that sleep would be impossible with him so near. Yet she must have dozed, for she woke sometime in the night to find William nursing contentedly and Yates watching them both, his eyes reflecting the moonlight that streamed through the small window. "I didn't mean to stare," he said quietly when he realized she was awake. "It's just, you're beautiful, Hannah, both of you." The simple statement, delivered with such honest admiration, brought heat to Hannah's cheeks. "You should sleep," she murmured, unable to meet his gaze. "I know," he agreed, but made no move to turn away. After a moment, he added, "I'm glad you're here, Hannah. You and William. Whatever brought you to my door that night, I'm grateful for it." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to fully express. When William finished nursing and settled back to sleep, Hannah finally raised her eyes to find Yates still watching her, his expression a mixture of longing and restraint. "So am I," she admitted softly, "more grateful than I can say." They fell asleep facing each other, William between them, a family in more than just name for the first time. Martha's visit brought an unexpected gift, the acceleration of Hannah and Yates's cautious courtship. With the pretense of an established marriage to maintain, they found themselves engaging in small intimacies that might otherwise have taken months to develop, naturally holding hands as they walked to the barn. Yates's arm around Hannah's waist as they stood on the porch watching the sunset. Quick kisses good morning and good night that started as performances for Martha's benefit, but gradually took on genuine warmth. More significantly, sharing the loft and the narrow bed each night brought a physical awareness that neither could ignore. Though William always slept between them, a barrier that maintained propriety, the simple act of lying beside each other, of sometimes waking to find their hands had sought each other's in sleep, created a growing bond that transcended their practical arrangement. Martha, for her part, observed them with knowing eyes but made no direct comment on their relationship. Instead, she took every opportunity to include Hannah in family conversations, sharing stories of Yates's childhood and seeking Hannah's opinion on matters relating to the boy's education and future. "He's different with you," Martha said one afternoon as they hung laundry together, the men and boys gone fishing at the creek. "Happier than I've seen him since Elizabeth died." Hannah concentrated on pinning a sheet to the line, uncertain how to respond. "He's been very kind to us." Martha snorted softly. "Kind? Yates is kind to stray dogs and neighbors in need. What he feels for you and William goes far beyond kindness." She handed Hannah another pin. "He loves you, you know. May not have said it, yet he was always slow with words, but I know my brother." Hannah's hands stilled on the damp fabric. "Our marriage was a practical decision," she said carefully. "Maybe at first," Martha agreed, unperturbed, "but what's growing between you now is real enough. I can see it in the way he looks at you when you're not watching, in how he reaches for you without thinking." She smiled. "And in how you look at him, too." Before Hannah could form a response, William's cry came from the cradle set in the shade nearby, saving her from having to confirm or deny Martha's observations. The conversation lingered in Hannah's mind, however, especially that evening when Yates helped her clear the supper dishes while Martha supervised the boys' bedtime preparations. Their hands touched as she passed him a plate to dry, and instead of the brief contact they usually allowed themselves, Yates caught her fingers, holding them gently. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low. "You've been quiet since this afternoon." Hannah met his eyes, seeing in them the concern and caring that had become constants in her life. "Just thinking," she said, "about us, this arrangement we've made." A shadow crossed Yates's face. "Having second thoughts." "No," Hannah assured him quickly. "The opposite, actually." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Yates, when we married, we agreed it was for practical reasons to provide for William, to satisfy propriety, but I find myself wanting more than that." Yates went very still, the dish towel forgotten in his hands. "What exactly are you saying, Hannah?" "I'm saying that I care for you," she admitted, her heart pounding. "Not just as my provider or William's legal father. I care for you as a man, as my husband in more than name." For a long moment, Yates simply looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with deliberate care, he set down the towel and took both her hands in his. "I've loved you since I found you in the rain," he said quietly. "You and William both, but I never wanted you to feel obligated or rushed, especially after what you'd been through with Jerome." The confession, delivered with such simple honesty, brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "You never said." "Wasn't sure you were ready to hear it," Yates replied, "or that you'd welcome it if I did." Hannah stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I welcome it," she whispered, "and I think I might be falling in love with you too." The kiss that followed was nothing like the chaste pecks they had exchanged for Martha's benefit. This was a true meeting of hearts, a declaration without words as Yates gathered her against him, one hand cradling her face with infinite tenderness. Hannah responded with all the emotion she had kept carefully contained, letting herself truly feel the attraction and affection that had been building since that first rainy night. When they finally parted, breathless and flushed, it was to find Martha standing in the doorway, a knowing smile on her face. "About time," she declared, then tactfully retreated, leaving them to the privacy of their newfound understanding. That night, for the first time, William slept in his cradle beside the bed rather than between them. And though Hannah and Yates did nothing more than hold each other through the night, the simple intimacy of sleeping in her husband's arms, her husband in truth now, not just in name, felt like the beginning of the life she had always hoped for, but never truly expected to find. Martha and the boys departed after a 2-week stay, leaving behind a cabin that seemed simultaneously emptier and emptier without the constant activity of two energetic boys, fuller with the new dimension of Hannah and Yates's relationship. With the barrier of pretense removed, they were free to explore their growing feelings at their own pace. August brought the height of summer's bounty and the most demanding work of the year. They harvested vegetables from the garden, put up preserves for winter, and completed the hay cutting. Through it all, they worked as true partners, learning each other's strengths and compensating for each other's limitations. William thrived, growing stronger each day. He began to reach for Yates whenever he entered the room, a development that brought a look of such profound joy to Yates's face that Hannah sometimes had to turn away, overwhelmed by the pure emotion of it. In the evenings, after William was asleep, Hannah and Yates would sit on the porch, talking of their days and gradually sharing deeper parts of themselves, hopes, fears, memories both painful and precious. Sometimes they would read together, Yates's deep voice bringing poetry to life in the gathering dusk. Other times they would simply sit in comfortable silence, Hannah's head resting on Yates's shoulder as they watched stars appear above the valley. And at night, their physical relationship developed with the same careful consideration that characterized everything between them. Yates never pushed, allowing Hannah to set the pace, to indicate what she was comfortable with. When they finally came together as husband and wife in the fullest sense, it was with a tenderness and passion that healed old wounds and forged new bonds. Afterward, lying in Yates's arms as moonlight silvered the loft, Hannah marveled at the journey that had brought her here from desperate flight in the rain to this place of safety and love. "What are you thinking?" Yates asked, his fingers tracing gentle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best," she replied honestly. "If Jerome hadn't abandoned us, I would never have met you." Yates was silent for a moment, his hands stilling. "Do you ever regret it, that William isn't truly mine by blood?" Hannah raised herself on one elbow to look directly into his eyes. "William is yours in every way that matters," she said firmly. "You claimed us both that night in the rain, and you've proven your commitment every day since." She touched his face gently. "Blood doesn't make a family, Yates. Love does." His arms tightened around her, and she felt the dampness of tears against her hair. They held each other in the darkness, secure in the knowledge that what had begun as a practical arrangement had transformed into something far more precious, a true marriage, a true family, built on mutual respect and deepening love. September brought the first hints of autumn to the valley, cooler nights, touches of gold in the aspen groves that dotted the hillsides, morning mist rising from the creek. It also brought unexpected news in the form of a letter delivered by Tommy Mitchell on one of his regular visits to help with the heavier farm work. Hannah recognized the handwriting immediately, though she had seen it only twice before. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal, Yates watching with concern from across the table where they had been enjoying a mid-morning coffee. "It's from Jerome," she said unnecessarily, her voice tight. "Postmarked Denver." Yates's expression darkened, but he remained silent, allowing her the privacy of reading the letter first. William babbled happily in his cradle nearby, oblivious to the sudden tension in the room. Hannah scanned the neatly written pages, her initial shock giving way to disbelief, then a strange, hollow anger. When she finished, she handed the pages to Yates without comment, rising to pour herself more coffee though her cup was still half full. Yates read quickly, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. When he finished, he set the letter down carefully as if it might contaminate anything it touched. "He wants to see William," Yates said, his voice carefully neutral. Hannah nodded, staring out the window at the golden day beyond. "He claims to have had a change of heart, says he's made his fortune in Denver and is now ready to accept his responsibilities." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. "He'll be passing through the territory next month and wants to meet his son." "Does he know you're married?" Yates asked. "No, the letter is addressed to me at Silver Creek. Dr. Mitchell must have forwarded it." Hannah turned to face him, her expression troubled. "What should I do?" Yates stood, crossing to her side. His hands were gentle on her shoulders as he turned her to face him fully. "That depends on what you want, Hannah. Legally, William is my son now. Jerome has no claim on him unless we choose to acknowledge it." Hannah leaned into his solid strength, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "I don't want Jerome in our lives," she said firmly. "He abandoned us when we needed him most. He doesn't deserve to know William now." "Then that's your answer," Yates replied simply. "You don't have to respond to the letter, you don't have to see him." Hannah nodded, but a shadow of doubt lingered. "And if he comes looking?" "If he discovers where we are," Yates's arms tightened around her, "then he'll find a family, you, me, and our son, together." The emphasis on the word "our" was subtle but unmistakable. "I won't let him hurt either of you again, Hannah. That's a promise I will keep." Hannah believed him. In the months since that rainy night when he had found her, Yates had never once broken his word or failed to fulfill a commitment. Jerome's promises had been as insubstantial as morning mist. Yates's were as solid as the mountains that cradled their valley. "I love you," she said, the words still new enough to carry special weight. "You and no one else." "And I love you," Yates replied, his kiss sealing the vow between them. They decided to burn Jerome's letter, watching together as the paper curled and blackened in the fireplace flames. As the last fragments turned to ash, Hannah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, the final remnant of her past consumed by fire, leaving only the present and future, bright with possibility. That night, as they lay together in the darkness of the loft, Yates's breathing even in sleep beside her, Hannah placed a hand on her stomach, wondering at the changes she had noticed in her body over the past few weeks. It was too soon to be certain, but she suspected that spring would bring not just new growth to their valley but a new addition to their family, a child conceived in love rather than misplaced trust, a brother or sister for William. She would tell Yates soon, when she was more certain. For now, she savored the secret knowledge, a private joy to complement the public happiness they had built together. Outside, the first autumn rain began to fall, gentle and nourishing rather than cold and threatening. Hannah listened to its rhythm on the roof, so different from the desperate downpour that had accompanied her flight from Silver Creek. That rain had seemed an ending the death of her hopes and dreams. This rain promised renewal, growth, continuation. As she drifted toward sleep, Hannah offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the strange path that had led her here to this cabin, this valley, this man who had claimed her and her child as his own on that stormy night that now seemed a lifetime ago. Epilogue: 5 years later, the spring sunshine bathed the valley in golden light as Hannah stood on the porch, shading her eyes against the glare. In the meadow below, Yates moved through the new grass. William perched on his shoulders while 3-year-old Elizabeth and 4-year-old Daniel raced circles around them, their laughter carrying on the breeze. Hannah's hand rested unconsciously on her swollen belly, where their fourth child, third together, had been making his or her presence known with increasingly vigorous movements over the past weeks. Dr. Mitchell, on his last visit, had predicted an early June arrival, though Hannah suspected it might be sooner. "Mama, look," William called, waving excitedly as Yates swung him down from his shoulders. At 7, he was tall for his age, with Hannah's dark hair but a smile that exactly matched the one Yates now wore, as he watched his oldest son race toward a newly discovered rabbit's nest. Hannah sometimes marveled at how completely William had become Yates's child, not just legally, but in mannerisms, in the thoughtful tilt of his head when considering a problem, in his gentle way with the younger children and the animals. If strangers sometimes commented on how William had his mother's coloring, while the younger two favored their father, neither Hannah nor Yates ever corrected the assumption that all 3 children were born of their union. In truth, Jerome Blackwood had never reappeared in their lives. Whether he had sought them in Silver Creek and been redirected elsewhere, or simply lost interest in his newfound paternal feelings as quickly as they had apparently developed, they never knew. Over time, he had faded to a distant memory, relevant only as the chance factor that had driven Hannah out into that fateful rainstorm. The farm had prospered along with their family. What had been a bachelor's solitary homestead had expanded to a proper small ranch, with additional acreage purchased from a neighbor returning east, a larger herd of cattle, and a newly built second bedroom added to the cabin to accommodate their growing brood. Hannah had established a thriving side business selling her preserves and baked goods in town, while also finding time to teach their children and several neighboring families offspring in an informal school arrangement during the winter months. "Whoa there, little miss," Yates called as Elizabeth, her blonde braids flying, nearly toppled into the creek in her excitement. He scooped her up with one arm while keeping hold of Daniel's hand with the other, the picture of paternal competence that still made Hannah's heart swell with love and pride. As if sensing her gaze, Yates looked up toward the cabin, his smile deepening when he caught sight of her on the porch. Even after 5 years of marriage, that smile still had the power to warm Hannah from the inside out. "We found rabbits," Elizabeth announced as they approached the cabin. "Tiny pink ones. We didn't touch them," William added quickly, ever the responsible oldest child. "Dad says their mama might not come back if they smell like people." "Very wise," Hannah agreed, accepting Yates's quick kiss as he mounted the porch steps. "Did you check the north pasture fence? All repaired," Yates confirmed. "And the new calf is doing well. Martha's gift is thriving." Martha's latest visit had included the surprise present of a pedigreed Hereford calf, part of her late husband's breeding stock that she had maintained and expanded into a successful business. "Investment in my nephew's and niece's future," she had declared, waving away their thanks. "Children, wash up for lunch," Hannah instructed as they trooped inside. "Daniel, help your sister with the soap." As the children disappeared to the wash basin, Yates slipped his arm around Hannah's expanding waistline, his hand coming to rest where their unborn child kicked energetically. "Active today," he observed, his voice warm against her ear. "Always," Hannah replied with a contented sigh, leaning back against his solid strength. "Like his father, never still for long, or her mother, always busy with something," Yates countered, gently turning her to face him. His eyes, still as blue as the Wyoming sky, studied her face with familiar tenderness. "Happy Mrs. Vaughn?" The question had become something of a ritual between them, asked in quiet moments when the day's work was done or the children momentarily occupied elsewhere. Hannah's answer never varied, though the depth of feeling behind it grew with each passing year. "Completely, Mr. Vaughn," she replied, stretching up to kiss him properly, without the restraint necessary when little eyes were watching. "More than I ever imagined possible." Inside, the children's voices rose in some minor dispute over the soap, breaking the moment. Hannah and Yates exchanged amused glances before moving inside to referee. Her hand in his as they crossed the threshold into the home they had built together, not just the physical structure, but the family that filled it with life and love. That night, with the children asleep and the valley quiet beneath a canopy of stars, Hannah and Yates sat on the porch swing that had been his gift to her on their first anniversary. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they watched fireflies rising from the meadow grass like earthbound stars. "I was thinking," Yates said after a comfortable silence, "that if this little one's a girl, we might name her Grace." Hannah considered the suggestion, her hand moving in slow circles over her belly. "Grace," she repeated softly. "For my mother," Yates nodded, "and for what brought you to me that night. Some might call it chance or luck that I was riding that road in the rain. I call it Grace." Tears pricked Hannah's eyes at the sentiment. "Grace it is then," she agreed. "And if it's a boy, Samuel," Yates suggested. "After my father, Grace or Samuel," Hannah murmured. "Either way, loved and wanted from the very beginning." As twilight deepened around them, Hannah reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this place, this man, this life. From abandoned bride holding her baby in the rain to beloved wife and mother, secure in a home and family built on mutual respect and deepening love. Sometimes, she still thought of that desperate young woman she had been, fleeing Silver Creek with nothing but her child and her ruined wedding dress. If she could somehow reach back through time to that rain-soaked night, she would tell that woman one simple truth. What seems like the end of all hopes can be the beginning of something far more beautiful than you ever dared to dream. "I love you," she said instead to the man beside her, the words as fresh and true as the first time she had spoken them. "And I love you," Yates replied, drawing her closer as the first stars appeared above their valley, their home, their life together.